Hi, everyone. In the next 60 seconds, we're going to try something crazy. We're going to give you a story that is not about a crazy discovery or an incredible invention. No, this story is about both of those things and, more importantly, the quiet year they came from. Imagine if the greatest scientific breakthroughs of all time happened in isolation. What if one man, locked away during a deadly plague, quietly rewrote the laws of the universe? Welcome to our channel. And today, let's find out what happened when the world went silent. In the year 1666, the Great Plague swept across England. Schools closed, cities emptied. And a young scholar named Isaac Newton fled London to the countryside of Woolsthorpe. He was just 23 years old and known, and recognized, and alone. But this wasn't a year of loss for Newton. It was the beginning of what he would later call his annus mirabilis, his year of wonders. To understand what happened next, we first have to understand where Newton was. Imagine you're a brilliant scientist in the 17th century. Your options for research are limited. You don't have the internet. You don't have advanced equipment. And if you want to know how the world works, you have to explore the world itself. So that's exactly what Newton did. He spent his days walking through the countryside around Wollstonecraft. And it was here that he began to see the world in a whole new light. One day, Newton sat down under an apple tree. And as he looked up at the leaves dancing in the wind, a question popped into his head. Why do things fall? And why always downward? At the time, this question had been asked many times before. Most scientists agreed that objects fall to the ground simply because they're heavy. But as Newton looked at the apple above him, he realized that something else must be at play. What force pulls the apple towards the earth? And does that force only exist on apples? Does it affect other things too? This might sound like a pretty simple question, but Newton was the first person to think of it seriously, rigorously, and mathematically. He thought about what it would take to make an apple fall. How fast would it have to go? What kind of force would he need to overcome the pull of the earth? And then something amazing happened. Newton realized that this force wasn't unique to the apple tree. In fact, it applied to everything. The apple falls to the earth not because it's heavy, but because the earth pulls it towards its center. And that same force affects everything in the universe, people, planets, and everything in between. Newton realized that there was some sort of relationship between the mass of two objects and the distance between them. This insight led him to develop his law of universal gravitation, which states that every particle of matter in the universe attracts every other particle with a force that is proportional to the product of their masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between their centers. Basically, the bigger the object, the stronger the gravitational pull. And the closer the objects are to each other, the stronger the gravitational pull. With this simple yet profound idea, Newton had unlocked one of the fundamental laws of the universe. And it all started with an apple falling from a tree. But Newton wasn't done yet. His mind was just getting started. After figuring out how gravity works, Newton turned his attention to another pressing question: how do we measure change? To answer this question, he developed a new type of math, a way to calculate rates of change. Today we call this math calculus. But back then, it was revolutionary. Before Newton, scientists couldn't accurately measure things that were constantly changing. They couldn't calculate how fast an object was moving or how far it would travel in a certain amount of time. But with calculus, Newton had developed the tools to measure these things accurately. Not only that, he used this new math to explain how the universe works. He used it to calculate the orbits of planets, the tides of the ocean, and even the motion of falling objects. Calculus is used in almost every field of science and engineering today. It helps us understand everything from the smallest atom to the largest galaxy. And it all started with one man's desire to understand the world around him. Newton continued to push his own limits, exploring new ideas and challenging old ones. He discovered that light is made up of different colors. He developed the theory of color, invented the reflecting telescope, and discovered the laws of motion. But maybe his greatest contribution was the way he approached science. Newton showed that the universe follows mathematical laws. Everything that happens in the universe can be explained with math. This idea, known as scientific rationalism, has become the foundation of modern science. And if you're thinking this all sounds pretty crazy, you're not alone. In fact, Newton himself questioned whether these discoveries were real. After all, he had come up with these ideas in a small village with no access to advanced equipment or the internet. How could these ideas possibly be true? To verify his theories, Newton set out to collect data. He conducted experiments on optics, motion, and gravity. He observed the motion of planets and the behavior of light. And in doing so, he confirmed his theories and laid the foundation for modern physics and astronomy. But how did Newton manage to accomplish all of this? How did he develop groundbreaking theories and conduct experiments with limited resources? The answer lies in Newton's mindset. He was a man who refused to accept the limitations of his time. He was a self-taught mathematician, an independent thinker, and a man who dared to challenge the status quo. Newton's story is a testament to the power of human curiosity and ingenuity. It shows that with a curious mind and a lot of hard work, anything is possible. And it all started with one quiet year in a small village. Imagine a time when the world seemed to be at a standstill. People were afraid to leave their homes, afraid of a deadly disease that lurked outside. It was a time of fear, uncertainty, and isolation. But in the midst of this chaos, one man found solace in the quiet of his room. He turned his attention to the things that most people took for granted: the movement of the planets, the behavior of light, and the nature of gravity. And in doing so, he unlocked some of the deepest secrets of the universe. This man was not just a genius, he was a pioneer. He showed that the world was not as simple as it seemed, that there were deeper laws governing the universe that only needed to be uncovered. He showed that with a curious mind and a lot of hard work, anything was possible. The year was 1666 and the place was Wilster Manor. The world was facing the Great Plague and Europe was shut down. But in the quiet of a village, Isaac Newton was about to change the world. He was just 23 years old, and nobody with no recognition or funding. But he had one thing that no one could take away from him: his mind. In that 1 year, he would discover the law of universal gravitation, invent calculus, and lay down the foundations of modern physics and astronomy. He did it all without fancy equipment or the internet. He just needed a quiet place to think and a pen and paper to write down his thoughts. So if you ever feel like you need all the resources in the world to achieve your goals, remember the story of Isaac Newton. All he needed was one quiet year to change the world, and if he can do that, so can you.